I'm here to present the project that I did as conservation intern at the UBC Museum of Anthropology, making a case for conservation. As I'm sure you're all aware, questions and concerns surrounding the issues of advocacy and outreach have risen in the museum world. So when it came time to choose a final project, it was decided that in the 3 months that I had available, I would attempt to raise the profile of the conservation department using whatever methods I could come up with. I personally believe that the conservation of cultural heritage should be a collective responsibility, just like the conservation of natural heritage, and that outreach provides a platform for museum professionals to communicate the challenges of their field. Additionally, professional transparency through outreach creates an environment of trust between ourselves and the communities that we serve. But then the question was, is there any evidence that the communities will support conservation and the long-term preservation of collections? The answer I found was that they would. In 2003, the CMA polled Canadians to determine their general views and awarenesses about Canadian museums. 2/3 of the respondents indicated that they would consider or would support additional funding for the preservation of museum collections. Previously successful examples of conservation outreach by museums have included full-scale exhibits, such as the British Museum's 2008 exhibit, Conservation in Focus, which literally put conservators on display performing simple object-based treatments. Additional forms include explanatory or exploratory information within an exhibit, such as a short film that was played during the ROM's 2009 exhibit on the Dead Sea Scrolls that explored the conservation efforts taking and getting the scrolls ready for exhibition. Unfortunately, due to the time constraints of my own project, I knew that designing and implementing a full exhibit would not be possible. So instead, I decided to focus on 3 already established avenues of outreach and programming: the permanent galleries, the museum's website, and the volunteers of the museum. As my first avenue, I chose the multiversity galleries and their permanent collections, which I believed were an ideal location to place conservation-focused information. The plan was to design integrative labels that could be placed among the collections on permanent display. For content, I chose current standards and practices used by conservators in the museum exhibit environment, all of which are visible to the public but usually go unnoticed. Additionally, I worked in conjunction with the design team to create labels that were consistent with the rest of the signage within the gallery spaces, but that were also distinctive from the descriptive labels associated with the objects themselves. As my second avenue, I chose the museum's website and the conservation pages. Collections outreach had already been achieved via the museum's online catalog MoaCat, which can be accessed both at home and also on touchscreen terminals throughout the galleries, but their conservation pages themselves were quite outdated. So for my purpose, I decided to focus on more recent projects and current practices used by the conservators at the museum for topics for discussion. In addition, I composed my own intern blog, chronicling my own projects and experiences while I was at the museum. As my final avenue for outreach, I chose the volunteers of the museum who serve as guides and educational programmers. While conservators may serve as a direct link to the collections, our interactions with the public are rare, whereas the museum volunteers, who far outnumber the permanent staff at the museum, are the public face of the institution. In order to teach the public, I decided to teach the volunteers themselves. To do this, I circulated a short questionnaire asking them what types of questions they had or had been asked by visitors about conservation. Based on their responses, I then composed an Introduction to Conservation at MOA guidebook, which featured these practices employed by the conservators at MOA on their collections. This was then circulated among the volunteers and was eventually posted on the website. The feedback from the guidebook was extremely positive, and it was a good indicator of the receptiveness of the volunteers to learn more about conservation. It was even suggested that a Q&A session be held with the conservators so that they could gain additional knowledge above and beyond what was in the guidebook. Of the 3 methods of outreach that I chose, I found the internet and the blog to be the most challenging due to the constant demand for new and updated information and the time commitment involved. I suggested for maintaining this to assign it to a longtime volunteer or even an intern. In the end, I believe that the 3 modes of outreach that I selected really helped me to achieve my goal of raising the profile of the Conservation Department, as now information about the department is more visible and accessible to the public. I believe as we move forward in building the museums of the future, we have to remember that advocacy through outreach does not need to take the form of a large-scale exhibition, but can instead be the dissemination of more knowledge through already established avenues of outreach and programming. Thank you.